Welcome to our St. Luke's Health Talks, where we bring virtual live education to you, our community members, which supports our mission to improve the health of the people in our region. To find additional St. Luke's Health Talks and offerings, you can go to our website, stlukesonline.org/health talks. Some of our past offerings are also on the St. Luke's Health System YouTube channel. You can search St. Luke's Health System in your favorite browser and search YouTube, of course. I'm Sarah Hagerly. I'm a St. Luke's Community Health Program Coordinator. Today we have a few housekeeping tips. And you will have the opportunity to ask questions through the chat function and also ask them verbally. We have microphones available to our audience. Please be muted during the presentation while you were listening, and you can type in questions in the chat. We'll watch those as it goes. And we have a disclaimer today. The information in our video, because we are recording, should not be construed as medical advice. This video and contents are property of St. Luke's and will be made available for educational purposes. Because we are recording, if you share any personal information, your name or statements or discussion, that is part of the recording. Our health talk today is caregiving in the rural setting, and we welcome Shannon Nelson, a certified registered nurse who is a care coordinator with St. Luke's McCall. Thanks for joining us, Shannon.
All right. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Caregiving in the Rural Setting talk this afternoon. And I'm super excited to be talking about something that I am privileged to be involved with almost on a daily basis here at the clinic up in McCall, along with a team of fabulous people who were known as Office Awesome. And so I have a wonderful team that I get to work with. We are going to start with a video which has nothing to do with caregiving, but
please continue to watch our health talk on caregiving. The live audience viewed a YouTube video titled Olive and Mabel, the company meeting, for some laughs about virtual meetings. You may find Olive and Mabel by searching YouTube.
Can you see my slides?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we're going to start out with looking at some statistics, and I love statistics. It just is fascinating to me to watch the numbers of various things that we're involved in. And this first slide is talking about caregiving in the United States. And this was 2020, and so I'm assuming that it actually has changed quite a bit since then, especially with the pandemic. But if you look at that more and more people identify as caregivers, and quite a large percentage of our population, in fact, about 20% of people in the US identify as a caregiver. And those numbers have just been increasing predictably and steadily since 2015, which is when this data was collected, from 2015 to 2020. 61% of caregivers are women, and 39% are men. And as no surprise to any of us, almost half said it had one financial impact, which I'm sure it's actually probably more than that. We're in Idaho, or at least I'm assuming most of us are, and so Idaho is similar in the national trends. So depending on what source I looked at, 1 in 4 or 5 Idahoans identify as a family caregiver, which is more than 300,000 caregivers in our state. 25% of Idahoans live in non-metro areas. So that is people that live in our outlying communities that don't have as many resources as you would have in a larger city, like Boise or up north around Coeur d'Alene and such. And so a large percentage of our population in Idaho is not only a caregiver, but also in the rural area, which means it's a little trickier to access resources and support for whoever you are taking care of. I thought this helped to put it in perspective for me that the total population of Nampa and Star is about 75,000. And so that's, if you think about going to Nampa and Star, which I was just there yesterday, and there was a tremendous amount of traffic, that's how many caregivers in Idaho live in rural areas. So it's a significant amount of people. So there's different definitions for caregivers. I take care of my 16-year-old daughter, but really she's a normal 16-year-old, and while it has a lot of responsibilities, it doesn't put me in that caregiver category. So you're a caregiver if you're taking care of your spouse, your parent, a disabled child, and then there's people that may not identify as a caregiver, but you really are, I'm thinking of several people already who are taking care of an elderly neighbor, who are the guardian for their sibling, and things like that. So there's lots of different types of caregivers that we see in our area. So I kind of want to know what my audience is and who's our group today. There's about 20 of us, and I just want to know who you're taking care of. And I think Sarah was going to put something in the chat for this, or are we just going to have them write it as a message or say it with their...
Let me put it in the chat. I had done the second question, but let's do this one too.
Okay, whatever you think.
You people can take their mics off of mute by clicking the microphone button and sharing if they would like to. And then there's also going to be an option on the screen in just a second where you can type in who you take care of.
Yeah, so if you wanted to unmute yourself and just let us know, are you taking care of a family member or a neighbor, and maybe what their diagnosis is, and we'll let you list that for a little bit.
Yeah, so there should be a poll on your screen and you can type in an answer and it'll pop up and tell us who you're taking care of.
Okay, someone their mom has dementia. Elderly parents. A neighbor. Hats off to those of you taking care of non-family members. That takes a little extra, I don't know, I just feel like it's a little extra thoughtfulness. Someone's a social worker at St. Luke's Hospital in Ketchum, and yeah, you know exactly what I'm talking about when you're supporting caregivers when their loved ones are in the hospital. Injured family members. It's kind of nice when you have someone who has an injury. Hopefully you think that, or you know that it's going to be improving over time. Autoimmune conditions, neighbor, facilitating support groups as a social worker. Thank you for doing that. Some people are taking care of church members. So lots of different adult children. Oh boy. Yeah, so lots of different people that we're taking care of and are involved with on a daily basis. Someone has a wife in the care center. Ooh, yeah, thank you for saying that. I want to just recognize caregivers. A lot of times we think of caregivers of having somebody in your home, but when your loved one has to go into a higher level of care, either in a care center or assisted living or whatever, you still are very much part of their caregiving team and an advocate for them. And so your work does not end when your spouse or care receiver goes into a higher level of care. And so that is a super important role that continues on as you're taking care of your loved one. So let's talk about some of the impacts of, oh, and thanks for sharing all those different things. That's a lot of variety and uh, lots of different responsibilities. So let's talk about some of the impacts of being a caregiver. And I have a whole list here, but if you want to either unmute your microphone or type in the chat, what are some of the impacts that you've experienced personally or that you've observed caregivers, for those of you that are in healthcare? What are some of the impacts of being a caregiver? And Sarah, our Zoom expert extraordinaire, has put up another poll that you can type in, some of the impacts that you're experiencing or have noticed of being a caregiver. Compassion, fatigue, and burnout. Yeah, big time. Loss of sleep. Ooh, frustration, toll on your body. Test of your patience. Neglect. I would maybe expand on that, maybe a neglect of your own self-care and neglect of your care receiver. Sometimes that burnout leads to just, oh, I just can't do it anymore. I just can't, um, provide the care that you know that you need to, but you're just too exhausted. Some other ones that I've thought about is loss of independence of the caregiver and the care receiver. I have a patient right now who, oh, anxiety and depression. Yep, more coming in the thing. Um, I have a patient currently who is has had a spinal cord injury, and so not only is the caregiver losing independence, but the care receiver has lost independence because of their diagnosis, and so that independence loss is really can be pretty devastating. Increased responsibilities for activities of daily living, particularly for the caregiver, obviously. So logistics, appointments, managing household stuff, chores, accessing care, paying the bills, going to work if you're able to do that still. All of these things can fall on the shoulders of the caregiver. For those of you and us who are taking care of our spouses, the loss of intimacy is something that we find patients grieve a lot. The relationship changes from a collaborative relationship, a partnership, to caregiver and care receiver. And that can be incredibly sad and also stressful because you can feel alone. Financial strains, not only from the cost of caregiving, but also from the decreased time and ability to go to work that is paying. I can think of several people already that have had to either cut back or quit their jobs in order to take care of their loved one. And while it saves money to take care of their loved one, you're also not bringing in the money for your bills. And so, yeah, that's a huge weight. Increased cost of transportation to go to medical appointments and things, pay for respite care. And so a lot of pretty significant financial implications. Another loss is the loss of opportunity to socialize, either because, let's say you have someone that has dementia, going outside of their routine and outside of their home environment can be not worth the headache and the stress that that can cause, or simply the fact that a caregiver is not able to physically leave their loved one alone. And so they've lost the ability to go and hang out in their places of socialization, either, their church family or gym, or going for a walk with friends, or going to town. All those things can take a big toll on the opportunity to socialize. A change in roles I talked about a little bit. I think of this especially with parents and children where, I, for example, take care of our 16-year-old because I'm her mother. But how different it would be if then she needed to take care of me. And so instead of being the quote responsible adult, I am now the person that is needing direction, can't make decisions on my own without some input. And there can be a lot of pushback from that with our elderly patients or patients that have lost a lot of independence and now have to rely on their family to help them make decisions. And sometimes it's kicking and screaming. I think of when we have to take away the keys, for example, for driving, or talk to a loved one about, it's no longer safe for you to live home alone. Those are things that that people often don't take to with a lot of warm, happy feelings. So that's a difficult conversation. Loss of retirement plans, loss of dreams for a child's growth and development if you're taking care of a disabled child, dreams for what you were going to do. Oh, I'm going to do this when my kids move out of the house. Well, now you can't because now you're taking care of mom who needs 24-hour care, or this is what we were going to do when we retired, and now your loved one is not able to travel. So loss of dreams. Increased stress and anxiety about what the future holds, thinking about, oh, I'm going to be on my own, or how am I going to manage this care of my loved one with all the weight that that brings. So you're always on the clock as a caregiver. Having time off is great, but then you're worried about, is it working out with the caregiver? Is my care receiver doing okay? Are they having anxiety? Or if you can leave them home for a couple hours, I hope they're okay. I better leave soon because I want to make sure that they're not, wandering or left the stove on or whatever. Loss of physical and mental health. A lot of times because we put others first instead of ourselves, and so neglect things like exercise and good sleep and mental health care, all for a good reason, and because we need to be places and do things, but it does take a toll on us for sure. Now my talk talked about one of the things was unique challenges of rural caregivers. And as I put this together, I realized that there's actually more similarities than differences with caregiving, across the board, rural or in a metropolitan area. But here's some things that I came up with that we deal with pretty much on a daily basis with people. One of the biggest ones is distance to specialty care can be a huge barrier. So for us, driving to Boise is 100 miles, and our caregivers that are even more rural, say in Adams County and Idaho County and Riggins and New Meadows, for example, they may have to drive almost 3 hours to get to any kind of specialty care. And while we have great options here in our community in McCall for care, we don't have neurosurgeons in McCall or cardiologists. Every once in a while, we have a visiting cardiologist, but gastroenterology, dermatology, all the types of specialties that you may need to access as you're older, which means a longer trip, which means more time. It's exhausting, and it can be pretty expensive. So that goes with transportation is difficult. I just drove up from Boise yesterday, and yep, it's April 3rd and the roads were so snowy and it was terrible. And so, this can be challenging, especially for our elderly patients needing to go down to specialty care, and then they have to drive through the canyon and with their loved one who has Alzheimer's and is nervous, and the weather's terrible, and so that can be pretty stressful. Limited activities for care receivers. So we don't have a ton of handicapped accessible gyms. We don't have a lot of social activities or social programs, respite care for people that need care. And so that means that our caregivers are on the hook all the time, even more than some of our friends and family in metropolitan areas. Just the nature of living in the country means that we have limited options for respite care. There just isn't enough workers, and because our geographical difference is so wide, um, we may have a caregiver that has somebody that is in Donnelly, and then they have somebody in Riggins. Well, that's over an hour distance. And so to have enough caregivers and to have the caregivers available in the area that are um, in the area that they're needed can be challenging. Now, this I'm talking about is caregivers that you hire for respite. And so they may come in, a couple times a week or whatever. But we have limited options, and getting enough staff to help out with that can be a real challenge. We find that a lot of times isolation from for our caregivers is a huge problem. And one of those, oh, somebody's not muted. There we go. Oh, thanks. Thanks. One of the troubles is just loneliness. Because of our geographical differences, where people are just really spread out, you can't just run down to a caregiver support group or church or whatever, because it takes 45 minutes to get there, and that's the amount of time that you have that you can leave your care receiver without being totally stressed out about it. So isolation is definitely a big issue, and leaves people feeling even more alone. Employment is hard as a caregiver, and in rural areas where traveling is far and employment options might not be as plentiful, it can be hard to find some employment that's going to go ahead and be compatible with a schedule that needs to be flexible based on the care receiver's needs. Are there any other challenges you're faced with in your area that isn't listed here? And I know there's some people, I think, from Sun Valley or Ketchum area, and some people in McCall and other rural areas. What are some challenges that you think are unique to the rural caregiver?
So people can unmute your microphone and talk if you want to, and you can also add information in the chat.
Thanks.
Yeah. Will you repeat the question, Shannon?
Yeah, just wondering what other challenges people might think of as far as caregivers. And it can be challenges that are unique to rural areas, or it may just be caregiving in general.
You got really close to talking about this, but the caregiver has to miss work a lot, potentially.
Yes, that is a huge problem, and not only in rural areas. That's kind of across the board. So
yeah, right, true.
And maybe there's not any. Maybe that kind of covered enough, and so people might not have anything else to say. So that's fine. So this is all pretty depressing. And I'm a positive person by nature, and oh yes, okay, great. Here's some. Fear of seeing a medical provider. Ooh, that's a good one. Tracy, can you expand on that a little bit? Why do you think there's a fear of seeing a medical provider? What are you thinking of when you say that?
I think it's the fear of a diagnosis. I think waiting too long to kind of see what sort of minor ailments could be, and waiting also the transitioning into palliative care, hospice care. It's a very much unknown fear. There's much fear with, the transitioning to like a nursing home or ALF too. That's immediately a straight no when when it looks like they're pretty weak and frail and not able to take care of themselves anymore.
Yeah, that's such a big thing. I think, we like to think ignorance is bliss, right? And if you go to your medical provider and you're presented with the, with the evidence, it can be pretty overwhelming. And so that's scary. I don't want to know, or I don't want to have the conversation with mom or dad or whatever, because knowing that that's going to be an uncomfortable and potentially hurtful or stressful conversation. So yeah. Other ones, the caregivers faces their own medical concerns. Absolutely. If you're tied with, you know, I'm going to go get my wellness exam, because I think I should do that, or I have to pay for caregiving for, you know, a couple, 2-3 hours to do that, and money is a big issue for you. You're going to put your wellness exam on hold, and wait until you can't wait anymore because you have problems come up. And so by the time something you do get checked out, you're already kind of down the river of unhealthiness. And so that is, you know, you're already a little behind on that. Some others from the chat are cost and availability of respite. Oh boy, that's super challenging. And for those of you that don't understand the difference between home health and respite care, home health, you have to have, it's very narrow criteria for homebound. And not only that, that's not somebody that's coming into your home for 8 hours a day or whatever. That's a nurse coming in for a visit for an hour to a week. And while they're invaluable and super beneficial, there's not a lot of people that are eligible for home health. And so then you're left with respite care for homemaker agencies, which are wonderful agencies, but you're right. Virginia, or who was it, talked about that. Kay said the cost and availability of respite. So, you know, it's anywhere from $20 to $40 an hour out of pocket. And that is if you can find somebody to do that respite care. And so that's really overwhelming. Community and social access during the winter months. Oh my goodness. This, in our never-ending winter here in McCall, especially this year where we've now received over 200 inches of snow this season, this is such a big deal. And we see a big nosedive in many of our patients' mental status, particularly in the winter months, just because they're inside and cooped up. And that's where we have to get a little creative in helping people to get out and safely get out. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So yeah, so that's depressing. That was more depressing conversation. And so yeah, and we see that in the statistics with caregivers that 73% of caregivers have their own health conditions. And with an aging population taking care of their aging relatives, that's not a big surprise, but over 30% of caregivers report having some sort of depression. And with all the things that we've already mentioned in this, it's no wonder that people are having some depression and anxiety and just feeling completely overwhelmed. And that's where I think my passion is helping people to access resources so that you can be healthy and be the best caregiver without being in the pit of despair. So that is going to lead into some more happy talk. And talk about what are some of your go-to self-care activities. If you did not have the responsibility, if you could just go this afternoon, you didn't have to be at work, you didn't have to take care of your loved one, you didn't have to pick up your kids from school, what is something that you would do for an hour, say, that you think would be good for your self-care and would boost your mental health? And go ahead and either unmute yourself. Oh, a massage. Ooh, Connie, that's great. Fresh air and exercise. Yes. Any others? Just think about, oh, if I could be anywhere right now. Visit with friends. Nice. That socialization is super important. Diamond painting. Ooh, I'd love to hear that. See what you're painting. Take a bath and read your book. Let's add to that, Erin. Take a bath and read your book uninterrupted, huh? You didn't have to get up and help somebody or answer a call or whatever. Read a good book. Yes, absolutely. Uninterrupted. Alone time in your own home to do nothing. That's a very luxurious thought. Reading, meditating, yoga, watching a movie, cat snuggling, my number one, cat snuggling. And so, yeah, walking the dog. There's all sorts of things that we like to do, and yet we put them on the back burner. Phone calls to friends, great one, Barb. We put our self-care on the back burner because other things are more pressing, and that is a normal caregiving response to just the burdens of life. But it also leaves our tank empty if we don't have something in that self-care bank to help get through the hard times. All right, so we're going to make an action plan for the week. And this is something, if any of you have done the Powerful Tools for Caregivers class, which I highly recommend. Oh, music. I love this. That's a good one. Another good one, Barb. Let's make an action plan for this week, and I'm going to ask for some participation. We're going to take a couple minutes. An action plan is something that we do on a regular basis every week, actually, in the Powerful Tools for Caregivers class, which if you haven't done it, I highly recommend it. It's a 6-week class that is once a week. If you live in Boise or a more metropolitan area, they have them much of the time. If you are more rural, this is something that you can access on Zoom. And so if you just look up Powerful Tools for Caregivers, there's virtual classes, and I highly recommend it. It's been a great tool for our caregivers. So I would like you to take a minute. If you have a piece of paper, that's great. If you don't, that's fine too. Just think of it in your head. I want you to think of something that you can do this week, in the next week, for yourself. And so often when we think about goals and action plans, we think about what we're going to do for somebody else. So, you know, I'm going to take mom to get her hair done, or I'm going to help my husband with, you know, ordering those new pants that he needed, or whatever it is. But really, action plans are about what you're going to do for yourself. And no, it's not selfish, it's self-care. And it's going to be something that you want to do. This is not a, I have to do this. A self-care activity is not to go and, you know, change the oil in the car, unless you really like to change the oil in the car. But it's something you want to do. It needs to be reachable. It needs to be behavior specific. So when we're making goals for ourselves, ooh, thanks, Sarah. When we're making goals for ourselves, it needs to be really specific. So if you just say, I'm going to take better care of myself, that is so vague in general. And it's a good thought, but it's not something that you can reach for. It's not measurable. So it needs to be behavior specific. It needs to answer the question, what, how much, when, and how often. What are you going to do? How much are you going to do? When will you do it? And how often are you going to do it? And then a confidence level on a scale of 1 to 10. If you make an action plan and your confidence level is a 2, there's a pretty good chance that maybe you need to adjust that action plan. Is it too lofty of a goal? Is it too overwhelming in what you're already doing? So reach for something that is a confidence level at least a 7 or greater. So I'm going to give you a minute, and then you can either unmute or you can type it in the chat. So this is my action plan for the week. I'm going to go cross skiing on Payette Lake once with my friend Carol for approximately 1.5 hours, and I have a confidence level of 8. 2 off for weather and Carol's schedule. So we'll see. I think that should work out okay. Okay, so hopefully some people are starting to finish up their action plan. And if you want to go ahead and share those however you are most comfortable, that would be super. Oh, I love watching people's actions plans. They're the best. Tracy is going to go to Target and get a Starbucks drink and aimlessly walk around for at least a couple hours. This is fantastic. A confidence level of 9. That's great. Take a hike or snowshoe in the winter, Sonia says. Okay, well, it's very wintry. I feel like that's a pretty good goal as long as you live where there's snow. I'm assuming you live where there's snow. Jackie is going to read a book for 30 minutes before bed with a cup of tea, and she has a confidence level of 7. Let's talk about so you get to the end of the week and Jackie, you realize that this is not going to happen. You're not going to be able to sit for 30 minutes. What are some ways that you can modify your action plan to make it more attainable? And same for you, Kay. What if you get through your week and you're like, ugh, I can't do yoga for 30 minutes. I just can't do it. It just doesn't work. What are some ways you can modify an action plan to still be successful and modify it for the rhythms of life? What are some ideas from the group? Cut down the time. Yes, that's an excellent one.
Yeah, I was going to say just lower the expectation, whether that's time or, do a different activity, just change it up a bit.
Yes, change it up a bit and give yourself some grace, realizing that sometimes life interferes. Be flexible on your time frame. Life interferes, and that's not a failure. That's just the rhythms of life. And so, yeah, cutting back on your time. Also realizing that sometimes the things that you think are super important maybe can wait so that you can go ahead and do your self-care activity. Writing things down, writing action plans down is shown scientifically to make you more accountable if you write it down. And then you even become more accountable to that plan if you speak it out loud. So for those of you that wrote it in the chat, Tracy, Sonia, Jackie, Kay, you have increased the likelihood of following through on your action plan by typing it out. Simply that mechanism in your brain helps you to want to stick with it more. I've said it out loud that I'm going to go cross skiing with Carol, and I've written it down. And so that helps me to stay accountable. And that's empowering. So I would encourage you to use that really simple tool, especially for caregivers that don't need something complicated. Just make it a goal. I'm going to do an action plan once a week. And give yourself grace for that, but also permission to do something for yourself. Kay's already doing this. She puts her yoga goals on a monthly calendar on my fridge and keeps track. It keeps me accountable and is good, visible to validate when I'm able to fit it in. That's fantastic. What a great way to take care of yourself. Good work. Awesome. All right, there's lots of other tools on how to help yourself be healthy. There's several different, probably a bazillion websites and such to go to. And let's talk a little bit about resources. So here in McCall, we don't have a ton of resources. And going back to one of the challenges of caregiving, especially in the winter months, is getting your loved one or yourself out safely without falling and breaking a hip, or it's freezing or whatever. And so how can you maximize your resources in a small area and get a little creative? So for getting out, I'm going to use that specifically. We have one of our churches here who they have a walking track in their gym that's open to the public. And you can just go in there and walk laps. You can bring your care receiver in with their wheelchair and push them around and do laps. You can bring your loved one with a walker and help them take a walk. There's a lot of gyms that have accessible pools, for example, where they have like a lift for a wheelchair and you can have your loved one in the pool for some pool therapy, pool exercise, or even just go out and sit in the hot tub if you have a club that's available to do that. Community centers are often a great resource. They have a lot of different programs. Usually they have a meal, like a community meal, a couple times a week in the evening that's either free or pretty low cost. Libraries are another way to get your loved one into the public or yourself in a place that is calm and may have some activities like community lectures or just going in to read a book or play a game. I know our library has just a game table. You could go in and play games or whatever. So that's some resources that I know that our community uses fairly regularly. Lots of websites. The Alzheimer's Association of Idaho has been a tremendous resource to our patients and our caregivers here in the rural community. Not only are there a lot of educational opportunities online in the form of like online classes and such, but they also have a 24/7 hotline. And if you're not familiar with that and you're taking care of a loved one that has dementia or Alzheimer's, this is a great tool for crisis. So let's say you're up at 2 a.m. and you have a dementia behavior, like they're paranoid and think that they didn't get the mail and they really have to, and somebody needs to get the mail. Why hasn't anyone gotten the mail? You can call that hotline and say, I don't know what to do. It's 2 a.m. I haven't slept in 18 hours or 20 hours and grandma just will not rest. And they'll talk you through that. They're trained professionals in Alzheimer's and dementia. And so that website, als.org, also has the hotline number on there. There's a lot of disease-specific websites. So if your loved one has, Parkinson's, ALS, Alzheimer's, whatever, if you look up that disease and just say like Alzheimer's resources or ALS support or whatever, you should be able to find a lot of different things right at your fingertips where you don't have to leave the home. The Idaho Department of Health and Welfare, I've been amazed at how many resources that website has for caregivers. There is a caregiver specific tab, and it gives a whole bunch of online and local resources. Thank you, Sarah, for putting all those websites in the chat. The Idaho Caregiver Alliance is a place that we've started working with, and they also are super helpful. One of the things that I found out through them is they have caregiver funding available to help with respite care. It's a little bit complicated, and if you want some more information about that, I'm just going to go ahead and put my email in the chat because it's too complicated to try to explain here. So they have a lot of really great resources. Caregiver.org is another website that we use a lot for various online resources, webinars, and things like that. I mentioned the powerful tools for caregivers already. This has been a fabulous national, international program that gives a lot of ideas on self-care and how to take care of yourself as the caregiver. It's interesting because when people first come to the class, they think that it's a class on how to take care of your loved one. Actually, it's more of a class on how to take care of yourself. And I would highly recommend it if you're a caregiver, especially. There's all sorts of resources coming up in the chat. The Commission on Aging for Idaho has been super helpful. Your local healthcare team may have some coordination or social work options for you that can be super helpful. A lot of times, if you don't have a need as a caregiver, you may not know that these resources are available. And so a lot of times we'll get referrals. I just started taking care of my mom. I'm completely overwhelmed. I don't know what's available because I've never had to know before. And so your local healthcare team may have somebody that your primary care provider can refer you to. Healthandaging.org. This is a really interesting, let's see if I have a copy of that. Oh, I'll finish up this resources to check out. There's lots of podcasts. Probably you could listen to podcasts till the day you die. But one that I listened to recently about and for caregivers was a podcast by Kate Bowler. And the particular episode was called Wounded Healers. And it's the story of a husband and wife team. The wife had a devastating hemorrhagic stroke, I believe, when she was 27, and has some significant disability from that. And they've written some books. You may recognize them. But it's a conversation about living life as a caregiver and a care receiver. And I found it to be super encouraging. They've had a lot of really huge challenges, and to just listen to that conversation gave me a lot of courage and hope that you can have life after having a big change in your caregiving situation. Don't underestimate the power of word of mouth, especially in our rural communities. We're all very interconnected in some way or another. And so while you may not have had to access assistance in rural caregiving because you haven't needed to, when and if you do, please ask. Because a lot of times your friend, your neighbor, your coworker will be like, oh yeah, I had someone that blah, 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 or my loved one participated in this and it was super helpful. And so those are really important and meaningful resources because it comes from somebody that you know and trust in the community that you're at. This caregiver self-assessment, I'm going to click ahead to that, hopefully. Yep, it's too small and you can't read it. However, I would recommend going to healthinaging.org, and I got permission to go ahead and share this from the Health in Aging web people at the website. And on that, there is a caregiver self-assessment and questionnaire. Sometimes you're not sure if you're doing okay. And so it's hard to put your finger on it. And this is just a quick assessment that you can do kind of to get a pulse on where am I at really? I feel stressed out, but I'm not sure how I'm doing. And this just gives you a very concrete way to say, oh, wow, I'm really struggling more than I thought that I was. Or, oh, I think I'm doing okay. An interesting and helpful thing to do with questionnaires like this, I think, are to go ahead and do the questionnaire. Now you're really struggling, things aren't going well, so you make some changes, you go to your doctor or whatever, and then repeat it in a month. Have you made progress in feeling overwhelmed and feeling like you're a little bit more in control of your situation, which a lot of times you don't have control over, feeling a little control of your own stress level. Please don't underestimate the power of counseling. And most of our communities have access to some kind of behavioral health and mental health care. You are not weak if you go get counseling and have somebody to talk to about these challenges. This is a tremendously huge responsibility to have a care receiver that you're responsible for. So please give yourself permission to do that. And your primary care provider can help find something that's right for you. The one nice thing about our Zoom age, in spite of the challenges that we saw at the beginning of the thing with our little dog video, is that we do have a lot of telehealth options for behavioral health. And so if you're stuck and not able to leave your care receiver for whatever reason, geographical or just what's going on, you can access behavioral health care online. And so reach out to your primary care team if that's something that you feel like you need. Here's some reminders. You as a caregiver are never going to be perfect. I'm sorry to burst your bubble, but this is not reality. We all are human and we're all subject to the stress and strain of life. And so the goal is to be present, not perfect. And then this is another super helpful thing that I try to remember even with my daughter is no communication tool, well, she doesn't have memory loss, but no communication tool will make a person with memory loss remember what we have said. But the goal of communication with someone who is memory impaired is not for the person to remember what was said. The goal is to create good feelings for the moment. And so if you're struggling with self-care and it's making you angry and impatient and short with your care receiver and things like that, that is what's going to be remembered both by your care receiver and by you. It's that yucky feeling of, oh, I was such a jerk again. And so it's really important to remember that you are not going to be perfect. But if we can do things to help with our self-care, then we can come into the situation and have a good feeling, laugh about our, mess up or whatever, and not leave just feeling like you've blown it all over again. So I feel like there's about 16 more hours of conversation that could be had, but this is an hour-long presentation, and so just a very fast overview of some of the pitfalls and challenges, and then tips and tricks. And so I'm going to open it up for any questions that you might have or comments, helpful things that you've noticed. So you can either type that in the chat or speak it up with your microphone. We'll just have about 5 minutes or less to have a conversation. Sarah has so nicely put in the chat several different resources that I mentioned, and there's lots of other ones online, but feel free to access those. I found them to be really helpful in working with caregivers.
Yes, I think there's a lot of information people can learn with all of those different websites. I want to mention the health and welfare website is very large because they service so many different supports throughout our communities. And so dig around a little to find what you're looking for. Mm-hmm. And if not, go ahead and call their number. They have people to answer the phones.
Yeah, and I want to thank everyone for sharing your hour of time with me today, because time is precious, and especially for you caregivers, every second seems to be accounted for. So I really want to honor you and thank you. I definitely don't take that lightly. Please reach out if you have any other questions or concerns. I don't know everything, but I can sure find out things. And so, oh yes, more resources, aging.idaho.gov. I've used their website as well. Lots of different resources. And as those of you that are caregivers, give yourself a pat on the back. You are doing amazing, amazing work. And we appreciate you for all of the time and energy and expertise that you bring to your loved ones. So great job for doing that.
A question? Are your slides available?
So the St. Luke's puts the talks on YouTube. Is that right, Sarah?
Yes, typically we don't share presenter slides, but if you have a specific request, you can go ahead and email me or put a link, something in the chat.
How does that work when it's a YouTube? So it would just show me jabbering away?
Yes.
Oh dear.
It makes you a superstar.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yes. And it is being recorded. It is available if you take some time to click on the join link. You can watch it again. And if you put some notes down of the emails, I'll put that in a reply email to all participants, even those who didn't get to join us today.
Oh yes, here's a question. Jackie asked, do I have handouts for caregivers that you provide? Oh man, we have a billion. Yeah, and that's always changing because resources in the community change. But we do have a lot of different handouts for our community resources and self-care tips as well. Those are going to be unique to your community. My handouts aren't going to work in your community for the most part. And so if you have any questions about what we include when we talk to people, feel free to reach out to me offline. I provided my email and we can talk to you about that. But yeah, we do have a lot of different resources that we work with and then provide handouts or business cards or brochures or whatever. All right. Anything else before we wrap up? Thanks, Jackie. I'll look forward to hearing from you.
Well, this was a really great hour, Shannon. I appreciate your time and the content that you provided. It's very helpful, and you can see there's hope, glimmers of hope that people can reach out for as a caregiver. It's not all stress and bad news.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the biggest things to remember is that you're not alone as a caregiver. And so sometimes connecting with people is really challenging, but there is support available. So
great.
All right.
Thanks everyone for joining, and keep your eye on our website, stlucsonline.org/health talks for future presentations. Have a good day.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you.